What is cross-site scripting? So before I can answer that, I think we need to talk a little bit about what browsers do. The main thing that browsers do is they display documents written in a markup language called HTML, the hypertext markup language, and it looks a little bit like this. We have words enclosed between these angle brackets, less than and greater than, called tags, and in between those tags we have page content. So for example, the title tag contains the page title, an H1 tag contains a level 1 heading, a P tag contains a paragraph. So by default, HTML documents are a little bland, so we use a styling language called CSS, or cascading style sheets, to make things look a bit nicer. It looks a little bit like this. CSS isn't particularly relevant for this conversation, but in the name of completeness, I think it's worth mentioning. So having things look nice is all well and good, but modern web applications actually need to do things. And to do that, we use a language called JavaScript. It looks a little bit like this. One of the ways we can include JavaScript in a web page is to put it between script tags. So the JavaScript here in this example finds a button on a page and adds a thing called an event listener so that when the button is clicked, it pops up a message saying, "Thank you for clicking my button." We can see an example of this by clicking this button. Here we are. Thank you for clicking my button. You're very welcome. So it's important to note JavaScript can do more than just make annoying messages pop up. It can change the content of the web page, it can fetch other web pages, talk to other servers on the internet, and a whole bunch of other things as well. Pretty much anything that you can do by clicking links, filling out forms, and submitting them, JavaScript can do too. So that could be a little bit of a problem if JavaScript on my web page could talk to, say, your bank's web page. But luckily, browsers implement something called the same origin policy. The gist of the same origin policy is that JavaScript on my page can't talk to your web page and manipulate things. And that's a really good thing, because it means if you're visiting any website that, say, has pictures of cute kittens on it, it can't interact with your banking website and make transfers on your behalf or anything like that. So, you may have noticed that on many web pages you can influence the content of the page somehow. Whether that's on a blog post where you can post a comment, or maybe using a search engine where your search terms are provided in the page, on the results page. There are many different ways you can provide some kind of content that's displayed to just you or to other people. And when this happens, developers need to be very, very careful that user input is not interpreted by the browser as HTML and definitely not interpreted as JavaScript. This is usually done by turning special characters required for writing HTML, such as less than and greater than, replaced with more benign counterparts called an escape sequence. They look a little bit like this: an ampersand LT and a semicolon for less than, an ampersand GT and a semicolon for greater than. This tells the browser to display the actual character instead of interpreting it as HTML. So where things can go wrong, if user inputs aren't handled properly, a malicious user might be able to add JavaScript to a web page they don't control. For example, through posting a comment on a blog, or maybe they can craft a special link. Just like if you could provide a link to a search engine with the search terms pre-filled, the idea is the same. If the user outputs aren't properly escaped, that means they may be able to run their own JavaScript on that web page, and this is called cross-site scripting. It's often abbreviated to XSS, which in my opinion is an annoying abbreviation because cross doesn't begin with X, it begins with C. It's currently one of the most commonly found security vulnerabilities in websites, which makes it well worth talking about. It's important to remember, because JavaScript can perform any action that a legitimate user of a web page can, including filling out and submitting forms, being a victim of cross-site scripting attack can be extremely serious. If you imagine you were in, say, a library and using a public computer, and you were using your internet banking site and then forgot to log out, any user that came to that computer after you would be able to look at all of your personal details, maybe even initiate transfers. Falling victim to a cross-site scripting attack can have very similar, if not identical, impact to that situation. So let's have a look at a demo so we can see the kind of thing that can happen. So on this page, I'm pretending that you are Sam Doe and you're logged into your internet banking services. So we can see the name, sort code and account number on this page. And here we have a search form for a list of recent transactions. So if we search for, say, coffee, we can see we bought a latte at Costa Coffee on the 2nd of August, and it was $1.99. So that's all fine. If you look up here, you can see that the search term has appeared as part of the URL. This is the part of the URL called the query string. And we could change this directly to, say, hammer, and see that we can influence the results on the page. Anyone being sent a link to this page would have that search term pre-filled. We can see the user input is reflected to us as the value of this text box here. And that's where the problem arises. If we view the page source for this page, we can scroll down and see that the value here has been pre-filled to hammer in the page source, in the HTML. And that means that we can change what that is. The issue here is, if the input has not been escaped and, say, quote characters and greater than characters are not properly escaped, a user may be able to inject their own HTML and therefore JavaScript here too. So as an example, let's insert a script tag and an alert of document.body.inner text. If you don't know what that means, don't worry too much about it. The important point is it's reading all of the text from the web page and it's going to put it into an alert window, which we can see here. All of the sensitive information here was available to the JavaScript, and that means that rather than being displayed to the user, it could have been silently sent to an attacker's server. So I hope that clears things up about what cross-site scripting is, and you can see just how impactful it can be.